We'll start with a question today. If New York City got moved along its line of latitude to the US's west coast, in which state would it end up? Just as a reminder to watchers that don't remember US state geography that well, the US has 4 states with a west coast: Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California. So your answer should be one of these 4 states. Welcome back to TwoLambdaPlusBlack. I am Heirua. Let's answer this question. We'll start with the latitude bounds of New York City. The northernmost point, which is the northern tip of the Bronx, is at 40.9 degrees north. The southernmost point, the southern tip of Staten Island, is at 40.5 degrees north. Over on the west coast, the Canadian-Washington border is at precisely 49 degrees north. The Washington-Oregon border is at about 46.2 degrees north at the coast, and the Oregon-California border is at precisely 42 degrees north. The correct answer for the state New York City would land in on the west coast is California. To many people, I think this would be a shock result. New York City is the heart of the northeast of the United States. Yet if it was on the west coast, it would fall in California, the southern part of the Pacific coast. In fact, there's a full flurry of surprising and unintuitive latitude alignments between western and eastern North America. For instance, Salt Lake City ranges from 40.7 degrees north to 40.9 degrees north, so even Salt Lake City averages further north than New York City. South of the southern tip of mainland Ontario is Pelee Island. Yes, here it's pronounced Pelee, in the middle of Lake Erie, a Canadian island that sits at 41.8 degrees north. So in fact, there are parts of Canada further south than parts of California. Moving further east, the northern portion of the Massachusetts-Rhode Island border is at approximately 42 degrees north, which you may recall from earlier is also the latitude of the Oregon-California border. So, there are parts of Massachusetts further south than parts of California. Portland, Oregon is further north than Portland, Maine. It's actually even further north than the Canadian border of Vermont. And this is just Portland, Oregon. As for Seattle, it latitudinally lines up with St. John's, Newfoundland. Or in other words, a majority of Canadians live further south than Seattle. Massive side note time. Some of you may be grinning a bit now because you know the reason the word approximately had to come before the latitude reading for the Massachusetts-Rhode Island border. For those of you who don't, the Massachusetts-Rhode Island border is actually very slightly angled from the parallel, so it is not truly horizontal. It definitely looks perfectly horizontal when you have a map on the scale of the US, but zoom into the border far enough, and eventually you'll notice. In fact, you may notice that nearly every border among the New England states is slightly slanted from perfectly latitudinal or longitudinal. It's one of those unfun facts that us map lovers unfortunately can't unsee. Join us, it'll be great. Another deal with the Massachusetts-Rhode Island border is that it cuts through numerous properties that are partly in Massachusetts and partly in Rhode Island. This eventually became a problem when during the COVID-19 pandemic, Massachusetts and Rhode Island both for a while became states that required everyone who visited the other to quarantine for 14 days upon re-entry to the state, making people living there technically becoming required to quarantine after visiting the other sides of their homes. Going back to our main topic, I'd like to put some thought into why the latitude alignments of the coasts are so surprising to many of us. I conjecture that there are 2 main reasons. First, the continental US is quite approximately rectangular, and thus we have a tendency to mentally conceptualize the US as a rectangle. On a map, it certainly looks close enough to one to imagine that the 2 coasts cover the same latitudes. It does help the illusion that the discrepancy is balanced, that is, both the north end and the south end of the East Coast are comparable amounts south of where they would be if the US was actually a rectangle. It also helps that both the north and south ends of the United States are long, visually separating the coasts far apart. With the southern frontier of the United States as long as it is, and with sufficiently many windings up and down in latitude, who's to notice that the northernmost point in Florida is further south than the southernmost point in California? The other effect on our mental conceptions, I believe, is climate. The prevailing winds of mid-latitudes and the flow of ocean currents deliver for west coasts of landmasses in mid-latitudes the nice and moderated Mediterranean and oceanic climates, making winters on west coasts far milder than winters on east coasts. We tend to highly associate latitude with climate. Many of us associate it more than metrics that are actually more correlated with climate, like altitude. Half of the East Coast frequently experiences snow in winter. For the West Coast, leaving out Alaska, snow ranges from being an occasional event for cities like Seattle to being an absurdity for cities like San Francisco. We conceptualize New York City as a northerly city in which it regularly snows in winter, and think surely it cannot be at a Californian latitude, not mentally factoring in what a climactic difference which coast one is on makes. I hope you enjoyed this video. I often hear people talking about how latitudes at which European cities are at are really surprising compared to those of North American cities. But I don't think I've heard much conversation about the same phenomenon with the sides of North America, which to me, at least, is actually more starkly surprising, so I decided to talk about it. Now, here is your puzzle of the day. And as always, a big shout out to my wonderful patrons for supporting this channel. You could join them by heading over to patreon.com/heirua. And as always, remember to love the night.